Welcome back to the Global Business Report here on Arise News. It is our eye on tech. Google says it has trained about 6 million youth in Africa, with about 5 million coming from just Nigeria alone. We caught up with Olumide Balogun, who is the director for Google West Africa at his office in Lagos. We discussed a range of issues, from the mission of the company in Africa to dealing with Nigeria's infrastructure gaps. All right, so when you think about Google, its search engine, it's massive company. As far as its footprints across the different continents, and particularly for Africa, what is the mission of Google? While you're here in West Africa,
we think a lot about our mission as connected to our global mission. So the global mission is we talk about how we unlock, how we organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. I like to say, how we take information, organize it, make it available to everyone everywhere. When you bring that home to Africa, what is useful? Useful really is talking about economic opportunity. A lot of people on the continent are thinking about economic opportunity, whether you're an individual, you're a business, you're a partner, even government is thinking about how we grow GDP. So a lot of the work that we do is really how technology can help as a facilitator of driving economic opportunity for these different groups, as I talked about. And so we've really been focused on, things like skilling programs. How do we do that? How do we get our products to really solve for problems that are, nuanced problems for the African context, for the Nigerian context. Just excited about the opportunity that technology holds for really driving, economic opportunity here on the continent. That's really what we're about.
So when we think about technology companies, everybody thinks about the future, right? So in your view, how can our youth, be equipped for the jobs of the future?
I think this is one that we think about all the time. I mean, we're a large youth population. I believe we will have the largest workforce on the planet by 2025. Just we're talking about in the next 12 to 18 months. And it's very important for us to think about how they're equipped. I mean, you talk about the future. I'll actually say they're equipped for the jobs for now, for today. We're very much in a knowledge-based economy at the moment. And so, we're very invested. We think about that a lot. And that's the reason why we've started for the last few years now, not even recently, for the last few years, everything from digital skills training, right? So far, we've been able to train 6 million people, on the continent, 5 million specifically in Nigeria. And not only do we train them, we look at essentially how this helps them get a leg up to get a job, whether that's a remote job or that's a job that's here. So that's the first thing. I think the other thing is really Google developer groups. How do we help developers? So far, we've done, if I'm not right, about 15,000 developers. We actually just announced a scholarship for 33,000 new developers. And by the way, if you think about this and all of the, I think, successes that we've seen with startups was built on the back of skills, developers, data scientists, web application designers, and things like that. We believe in the transformative power of artificial intelligence. And it's important that we think about how Africans, Nigerians can play a contributing role, not just from a consumption perspective, but from also building on top of the technology. So recently, for example, we partnered with the Kaduna State government to do this AI video series in Hausa, because we understand the importance of also getting these skills and this knowledge into local languages that people can actually consume. So I think the more we see that technology plays a role, the more we see that it's important for us to develop human capital, to help our teaming youth essentially take advantage of this way.
But there is the macroeconomic backdrop, right? We heard of Microsoft scaling down their development center across the world. There's been a number of layoffs in Silicon Valley and so on and so forth. So how are you navigating that? Are you looking at any layoffs yourself while you're here? How are you navigating those those headwinds?
I mean, we're in the economy, right? I mean, I think the businesses are in the economy, any economy for that matter. So when the economy goes through its ebbs and flows, we find that the businesses also have to pivot and think about how they continue to drive their agenda and drive their mission. But for us, we're really here for the long term, and I want to be clear about this. We've been here since 2007. We are very confident and, as a matter of fact, inspired by the opportunity that Nigeria holds for Nigeria, but also for the rest of the world. If you think about the size of the population, if you think about the average age of the population, so while this global tremors and even local here in Nigeria, as you rightly said, continues to hold sway, we're very, very focused on the future, and we're playing a long game. We want to continue to invest in the ecosystem. We think that those are the kind of things that gets us out of where we are. But I think we're also thinking about things that we have to, maybe think about doing a little bit later down the line where things are a little bit more stable. But we're definitely invested for the long term.
Okay, so the infrastructure gap in Nigeria, power, and so on and so forth, internet connectivity, was that matter with the undersea cables that got cut and disrupted? A lot of people say that, a lot of big companies should just provide everything themselves, but how are you navigating these infrastructure gaps, particularly here in Nigeria?
The thing is, there are two ways to look at the infrastructure gap, right? I think one is we can look at it as a challenge, and we are playing our part. For example, you alluded to the undersea cable. At the time when we had the undersea cable challenge, our Equiano undersea cable that connects Africa to the rest of Europe was actually a fallback for a lot of companies and is currently active. The research that we had done was that we will be able to get 1.6 million jobs just on the back of that particular infrastructure investment. More recently, you might have heard about Umoja, the very first cable that connects Africa to Australia, which we again, I think invested in. So there are things we're doing essentially to see how we can support to help close that infrastructure gap. If I think about Android smartphones, for example, we continue to think about affordability. We know how important it is when people are connected. They can build solutions, they can run businesses on the back of that. So one is to think about it as a challenge and see where we can play a very supportive role. I think the other one is to think about it as an opportunity. So a lot of the infrastructure gaps that we see are creating opportunities for new business models that, again, we think that technology can play a very significant role in helping to drive. As a matter of fact, there's research that we've done in partnership with the Economic Strategy Group, Alpha Beta, and it tells us that we could see up to $175 billion in incremental GDP by 2030 by investing in digital transformation on the policy side, as well as just on the skilling side, on the physical capital side, and making sure that we can build competitiveness. So I think those are things that if we can think of infrastructure gaps as both a challenge and see where we play a role, but also as an opportunity and how we can help inspire or how we can help provide opportunity for local partners and local businesses to ride on technology and solve some of those problems.
All right, so the talent gap, right? There's of course been this exodus of talent from Nigeria to other countries. The tech companies thrive on talent. How are you viewing, your workforce in terms of talent, and how are you handling things like training somebody, recruiting, and then they ship off to another country after less than a year or so?
We think Africa is. We think in Africa we have a huge capital base of human capital. As a matter of fact, we opened a product development center in Kenya recently. We've started an AI research center in Ghana, expanded into Nairobi as well. And these are centers that are providing support not just for Africa, but for the rest of the world. Now, having said that, we understand that, the wave recently has been of, people wanting to migrate and find great opportunities. But we continue to find talent here in the market. And the job, of course, that we then do is to see how we retain that talent, continue to build that talent, but also how we invest into ecosystem, initiatives to help to make sure that there is more and more talent that's being produced. There is definitely a sense that some of them will migrate, but we think that if we can create enough talent, we should be hopefully retaining some of them here to maybe work remote jobs, for example, and grow the GDP of the country as well.
All right, so it's June, it's half year, there's been so much going on. I just wanted to get your outlook on the rest of the year, maybe even beyond into 2025.
We think that my outlook in the more immediate term is really how do you thrive through the economic, I think upheaval. And one of the things for us is how do we continue to invest, in the areas that we're already investing in the short term. So for the rest of 2024, we think that that's really the role that we want to play, and that's how we see it. Opportunities still abound, and as I said, it's important for us to think of challenges and flip them around and see how do we think of them as opportunities, and how does technology play a role. That's really why we're here, and that's what we want to continue to support.